Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Planning Committee meeting. It's good to see some familiar faces returning to sit on this committee, and I'm sure they, along with myself and Tony, as the new chair and vice chair, will offer a warm welcome to our new members. Before we start today's proceedings, Tony and I would like a note of thanks to our predecessors putting on the record, Diana Rough and Alan Powell. They both did a good job in making sure that the committee was run efficiently and fairly for all members, and we will endeavour to continue in the same vein. Now, as you are aware, there are 4 applications on the agenda today. 2 of these were submitted by the council, item 5 and item 6, Littlemore and Renishire. Both are now for the change of use of amenity land for the use as parking. I know it is short notice, but I have decided not to take these today. This is because, as a new administration, we are going to review the council's parking strategy. It really wouldn't be appropriate for the committee to decide on these specific proposals in advance of this. And if you will pardon the pun, I think the best thing to do is we will park it. Consequently, we will only have 2 applications to consider. Item 4, Stonebroom, and item 7, Cutthorpe. We will then have the report on the planning appeals. I am happy with this and will take it in that order. For those new to the committee, you will find that it operates in a very structured way, so that we can get to the point where we can take our decisions on an application. If anything is not clear as we go along, then please let us know. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Have we received any in advance?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor N. Morley.
Thank you, Alan. The second item is declarations of interest. Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest and/or other interest not already on the register of interest in any item on the agenda and withdraw from the meeting at the appropriate time. Do any members have any interest to declare?
None received, Chair.
Move on to item 3 on the agenda. This is the minutes of the meeting held on the Tuesday, the 25th of April of this year. Are we happy they are a correct record? Is there a mover?
I'll move that, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Liggett. All those in favour? Thank you. That motion is carried. Thanks, colleagues. That brings us to the main business for the meeting, our applications. Before we start, I would like the clerk to explain, for the benefit of members, speakers, and those watching on YouTube, how we will deal with them.
Right, thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering the business this afternoon. Chair will introduce an application, then ask the planning officers to refer members to any late comments or updates received since the agenda was issued. These have been published on the council's website, and hard copies have been circulated to you. After this, the Chair will ask any speakers to address the meeting. They will each have 3 minutes to put forward their views. There will be a reminder given by the clerk when 30 seconds remain. At the end of the 3 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speaker questions, if necessary, to clarify any points they have made. After the speaker has addressed the committee and answered any questions, then they will be allowed to remain in the meeting, but they will not be allowed to participate further from this point. The Chair will open up the meeting for questions to officers. a debate by the committee, and finally, determination on the application by a vote. The votes will be taken by roll call. Finally, members, this meeting is being live streamed and a recording will be placed on the council's website. Please note that others may choose to copy this recording. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. Right, let's move to the first application. This is NED/22/00/886/OL. Outline application for residential development comprising of up to 30 dwellings and other associated works at land to the rear of 14A to 54 High Street, Stonebroom. Major development affecting public rights of way. In line with our normal practices, I'm going to ask the planning officer to tell us about any late comments and to give a brief presentation showing any photos and plans of the site. I will allow the officer to complete the presentation. Consequently, members, unless you have a point of order that you feel cannot wait until the end, please reserve all and any questions about the process until the end. Adrian, if you would like to.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Just before I start, Chair, I'd just like to refer members to the late comments report that was issued yesterday, and particularly reference to the two photographs at the bottom of page 36 of the officer report, which, as the correspondent rightly points out, are the wrong way round. That the photograph on the left looks towards the east and the photograph on the right, looks towards the west. So the photograph towards the east, the left-hand side one is, I suppose, where it should be the one on the right. So just to be clear on that point, Chair. And just in terms of introduction, the application submitted in outline with only the issue of access to be determined this afternoon. All of the matters are reserved for further approval should consent be granted. Therefore, whilst an indicative layout has been submitted, it should carry no weight in the decision-making process, although I will local plan and expected to deliver approximately 35 dwellings. It previously received planning consent in 2018. It is still currently a greenfield site. The committee are asked particularly to note the primacy of your development plan and that all planning applications should be determined in accordance with it unless material matters indicate otherwise. Officers are of the view, Chair, that in this case no such matters exist to outweigh the development plan. Agreement has been reached to meet fully the package of social mitigation requested, and 20% affordable housing is proposed. A number of technical issues have been raised in representation, but there is no objection from any of the technical consultees, and nothing substantive has been raised to outweigh that of advice. Just to go through the slides that we have, Chair, and aid memoir to yesterday's site visits. The application site, Chair, as you can see, the centre of the screen is a site to the south of High Street, adjoining the existing development of Stonebroom. As I say, it's a site allocated in your local plan for housing. That's identified in the committee report itself. This slide being a closer in version of that. And as you heard yesterday at the site visit, Chair, the site to the west, southwest is already developed also. Slide, Chair, shows the outline site in red and includes the access to High Street. And this is the indicative layout that I've referred to. It does show how a number of units could be fitted onto the site, but as I say, this should accord no weight in your consideration this afternoon, as all matters other than the access are reserved for further approval. In respect of that, a plan showing how the site would be access to the highway is submitted, and this forms part of your consideration. It shows a junction to High Street, two ways into the site with a side junction off and onto Pasture Lane. It does identify a footway to the west-hand side of the access as referred to in the report. And just in terms of a couple of slides through Sinead Memoir yesterday, as I say, Chair, this shows the junction from High Street onto Pasture Lane looking in the easterly direction. And this is showing the same point of access, but looking in the non-critical westerly direction. And then just for clarity, Chair, as I've mentioned, the photographs in the report on page 36 are the wrong way around, but hopefully this matter is clarified by those two slides. Just looking back onto the site, Chair, the site is in the centre of the slide. It's the greenfield area, bounded to the south by the hedgerow and to the north by the backs of the properties fronting onto High Street. And there is an existing stable building just on the left there, the white building. A footpath that we saw yesterday runs along the western side of the site. And that's at the hedgerow, just in front of those houses to the middle right of the photograph. Thank you, Chair.
Right, colleagues, we have 7 speakers on the application. Councillor Cupit will speak first as ward member. As the clerk explained, they will have 3 minutes to get over their points. They will be given. Councillor Cupit.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, you dropped out there. Is it for me to start?
Yes, if you can start, please.
There we go. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for allowing me to speak today. I know that to some extent the principle of development on this site has already been previously accepted by the council because it is an allocated site and the previous application was approved here back in 2017. But this approval has expired and I can't support the very different proposals in the application before you today. That previous application and the council's annual monitoring of it raises some big concerns for me. Aside from the fact 6 years have passed and nothing has thankfully happened with the site, which is indicative in itself, various ecology issues and problems with progressing the site have been highlighted by the council's own monitoring, with the result that this site wasn't really projected to come forward anytime soon. One of the biggest objections for me, though, is the proposed access to the site, which Adrian's just highlighted, which this application is trying to fully determine and agree onto Pasture Lane and then onto the High Street in Stonebroom. Pasture Lane is unadopted and just shared access ownership, with the result that it's in very poor condition, largely due to the surrounding rural land drainage factors, and it regularly floods. It is, however, a very popular right-of-way with residents and walkers. To therefore turn this popular pedestrianised area into a major road and junction onto the High Street, to me, would be really concerning. The proposed condition and proposal to consult on a traffic regulation order to ban parking on the High Street through Section 106 funding and double yellows, I can't see that would be successful, as existing residents, as you could see from the photos, have nowhere else to park just because of the layout of the area, would understandably object, and the TRO would therefore be unsuccessful. So I don't see how the committee can approve something on that basis. This would leave up to 70 cars coming out onto the currently very substandard junction and narrow roads. To further support this, the council's own policy assessment of this site several years ago recognised the highway's difficulties and indeed suggested finding an alternative access may be more appropriate. As a final point that I want to make, whilst I know that this application is only an outline and the indicative layout is just indicative, it is very concerning to me. It's very dense when you look at it, and it doesn't match with the character of the village, the surrounding street scene, or the rural area it would back onto. Whilst I know it's sort of been said that it can be addressed at reserved matters with that, I don't think it can, as the drainage issues, as I've mentioned on Pasture Lane, and the proposed settlement pond are going to take up that big area, and so approving 30 dwellings in outline is basically approving that indicative layout. With these facts in mind and the more detail that I think some of the most affected residents are going to highlight today, I hope you'll recognise this application isn't appropriate and refuse it. Thank you, Chair. That's me finished.
Thank you, Councillor Cupit. Have any members got any questions about the points which the speaker has made in their presentation? No. Right, we'll move on to the next speaker, which is also going to be on Zoom. That is Heather Powell, an objector. Heather, can you just confirm?
I'm not sure she's logged on there, Chair.
We'll move on to the next speaker then, which is Margaret Kimber, who I believe is in the chamber. If you wouldn't mind, when you sit down, using the microphone. Yeah. You just press the button on the microphone. Yes, please.
Thank-
Can you confirm this is your name, Heather? Yeah.
No, I'm Margaret Kim.
Sorry, I've got the wrong one. Margaret Kimber, yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, do you understand the process? You've got 3 minutes. Right, thank you. You're welcome to speak.
Right. Based on the official mining report from the Coal Authority 2017 and 22, why is this development even being considered when it has been declared some area of high risk? It states that wherever coal resources or coal mine features exist at shallow depth or surface, there is potential for mine gases to exist. These risks should always be considered by the LPA. The Coal Authority records indicate that a coal outcrop runs through the northern part of the site where the vehicle access is proposed. This coal outcrop may have been subject to unrecorded workings at shallow depths. If workings are present within the outcrop, these may pose a potential risk to surface stability and safety. If there is any risk in the area at all, why is it being considered? Before we bought our house, 46 High Street, we had a National Coal Board survey done. It states that 3 seams have been worked in the vicinity of our property between 1925 and 1948, ranging in depth from 200 metres to 260 metres. We and the adjoining property, number 46, have a crack under each of our windows caused by subsidence. I'm lost. Years ago, 10 years ago, we both had slip bricks put on the front of our properties. Over the last 2 to 3 years, the cracks have reappeared. My concerns, and they're coming through the slip bricks, my concerns are if they start digging and disturbing the ground behind our property, is it going to cause subsidence again? Will we have a guarantee it won't? 2 previous applications. 2 previous applications on some of the land were both rejected due to the drain infrastructure. Also, the requirement is Severn Trent Water to attend our properties over the years to block drains into the main drain, eventually on a monthly basis. In the last 2 years, which it concluded compensation being paid 3 times to us for spillage of sewage into my garden. No new drains have been laid since this to take on the extra 3 to 4 bedroom houses to be added, putting pressure on a maximum capacity infrastructure. Also, there is problems with sewage and drains on the new development of Carlisle Road. One young mum this week waiting 2 weeks
30
for
seconds left.
blocked toilets, so obviously a problem exists. Stoneroom School is to maximum registration for reception. Some people have not been able to register for the new term. Doctor's appointments are running 5 weeks and then having to travel to another village. And having worked on the team with the neighbourhood plan in the last 18 months, for Sherland and Higham Parish, I am concerned about losing more green spaces in our area. Also, there's no bungalows planned on there, which are needed. And lastly, the parking on High
That's
Street
time, Chair.
is horrendous. Thank you.
Sorry, can you just wait to see if we've got any questions from members? Have any members got any questions, Ms. Kimber?
Yeah.
Councillor House?
Afternoon, oh yeah, not too nervous.
I am. As you can see.
Take a big drink. You mentioned obviously about the, the mines and
Yeah.
subsidence. That's all right, that's not a problem, it's just a quick one really. Have you had a full engineer's report or did you have,
We
when you
did,
bought
yes.
the house?
Yeah. It's here somewhere. There. Yeah, that was back actually in 19, when we bought the
when you first
house.
bought it.
Yes.
So you
Uh,
had the full engineer's report.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And now the cracks have appeared again, this last 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is that it? Thank
Yeah,
you very
thank
much.
Thank you.
I'll take the drink.
Why not?
Kathy, can you
Sorry.
just turn your mic?
I'm representing as a resident.
All right, thank you, councillor Liggett, for that. Can make a note of that, Alan, please. The next speaker is Julia Smith. Thank you, Julia. Are you, do you understand the process?
Yeah.
Everything? Okay. If you'd like to speak, thanks.
Hi, I'm Julia Smith from 32 High Street and will be directly affected by this development. I'm very concerned about my privacy being invaded by being overlooked and noise and light pollution. I have a large conservatory which I use every day and I'm much closer to the boundary than the older type houses which are closer to the road. There is double parking in places and exiting my drive every day is a challenge. People already turn around on my property as it's wide and open. As well as people parking for the school, people park to use the forest school, as I've witnessed. I feel it's a small plot for 30 houses with potentially 60 plus cars needing to exit on what may be a daily occurrence. Plus there will be deliveries in these days of internet shopping. The photos on the planning officer report of the exit from Pasture Lane are not a true fact, as it's a reverse image. I emailed the correct photos on the 3rd, which you've shown. The speed limit is rarely stuck to, despite reports to the contrary. There was an accident in January near the school speed bump, where a car was speeding and crashed into a lamppost, which had to be taken down. High Street is a busy road with articulated lorries going to the industrial estate Monday to Friday, and is a thoroughfare for people going to Alfreton from villages like Pilsley. A report by Vectus in September states there will be 7.5% more traffic, maybe for the first year, but I've lived here 27 years and traffic is increasing all the time. So what about in the future? So I strongly object to this application and think using Pasture Lane to exit onto the High Street is an accident waiting to happen. That's all I've got written down. But if you live there and see that road, it is really, really dangerous. The state that it's being used now, just a few vehicles. It's horrendous. It's horrendous getting out of my drive every day and getting in.
Thank you. Do members have any questions? Thank you. The next speaker on the agenda is Stuart Ellis.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, sir. You have 3 minutes when you're ready.
So I'm representing Chesterfield Royal Hospital, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to have a view on the actual location itself. Our objection would only come if the Section 106 proposals included in the current report didn't translate if a development went ahead into a final agreement. And just to help members understand the impact of that. So we've been having conversations with planning officers for over 3 years now, detailing the impact that housing development within our area is having on demand for the hospital. The hospital is funded based on a previous 12 months activity, but often takes a 2-year cycle for this to catch up, with the immediate impact being increased wear on replacement of equipment and facilities. Housing development brings a greater population for the area and a very measurable impact for the hospital. Health planning data plan for significant increases in emergency attendances, but the rate of development, which including North East Derbyshire and our immediate areas is 12,000 houses in the last 3 years, is already contributing to this being exceeded with 9,000 more attendances than either the stretch ambition from local authority and public health planning previously. This has meant further adjustment to the ED capacity in the final years of the build to enlarge it further, with several £1 million worth of cost pressure. Increased wear and replacement rates on a wide range of equipment means we currently have an unfunded replacement, just as an example, of £1 million for our gamma camera, with other equipment like our CT scanners having to be replaced earlier and at a faster rate as a result of increased attendances. The impact on the hospital of housing developments become completely unsustainable without the effective use of Section 106, which does account for that, but hasn't previously been drawn on, amongst other key infrastructure, of course. Being able to identify attendances to individual streets and homes, we've got some of the richest data to support the request, which we believe is fairly and reasonably related to the scale and kind of developments. We're clear it meets the 3 tests of the regulation and understand it's been accepted by the developer in principle, as well as being in use in other parts of the country. We'd therefore like to thank your planning team for their support of helping us now move this forward, and felt matters are so critical though that it's important to help ensure that members also understood the impact for the residents, who at times also become patients if the impact of development is not properly considered.
30 seconds remain.
Taking place. So from our point of view, provided the impact on care at the hospital is taken into account under 106, we're neutral in that perspective about the actual location, which isn't a matter for us.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Just for the committee. Sorry, councillor, is your mic on?
Well, I thought it was, Chair, but it isn't, Alan, but it is now. You've asked for 66,000 for mitigating impacts of development towards Chesterfield Royal.
Yeah.
Can you give us any indication on how that would be spent, whether that's up at the Royal, whether that's out in local sourced buildings, doctors' surgeries?
So health funding is very complex, and I don't want to take up all of the committee, but there are 2 broadly things. So GP practices and the hospitals are funded very, very differently. So there's already a process where it impacts on local practices for contributions to be made where it has an impact that they can use. This is separate to that. So this is for direct use at the hospital to keep pace with the increased rate of equipment replacement. So we replace something like £79 million worth of equipment every single year. And that churn rate based on increased attendances is going up faster than the funding flows back in, which is where we've been guided nationally that Section 106 should be taking account of that impact on the initial increase in volume.
Yeah, go ahead.
The only reason I ask is because Stonebrune being where it is, they don't necessarily get directed to the Royal. They get directed off to Derby and Kingsway and Kingsmill and all over the place.
Yeah.
So if we go the Section 66,000, Section 106 to Chesterfield, how would that get disseminated between those other hospitals?
So to help with that, clearly you'll understand for anonymity, we don't share the detail down to individual streets, but in work with the planning officers, we can identify what proportion of every GP practice's patients come to us, which go to Derby, which go to Kingsmill. So work across the Derbyshire area, we've only identified and put applications in around those where the majority flow to Chesterfield as opposed to the hospitals, and the arrangement with the other hospitals is the same as to whether they pursue it or not. But we don't put applications in against those areas where the majority of their flow is to, otherwise it just becomes mind-blowingly complicated to try and split bits of money. So we do it, yeah. So we do it postcode wise, so we can be very clear the ones we're applying to are mainly our flow of patients.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. My question is about how this has been calculated. When we look at this, it's 30 dwellings and you're asking for 66,000. Obviously, there's a lot of calls for the 106 money. And it's all, as we can see there on page 32 and 33, it's all coming from different directions. And we know that it's up to our officers and this committee in which direction this money goes. It seems to me from the ones I've seen previously at this committee that that's 66,000. Now, I know when it gets to your hospital, it won't go far. Got that. But have you come to, it's a lot of money for these 30 houses compared to what I've seen previously. So how has it been calculated that? And I know you won't be able to give me the exact calculation.
Yeah.
But it's a nice round sum. So how is it being done based on these 30 dwellings? Or is it like you might have inferred earlier based on money that hasn't been sent previously to the hospital?
No,
Thank you, Chair.
I can give you lots of reassurance in here and quite happy in a more detailed offline briefing generally about how that works as a whole, because this is going to be an ongoing issue. But the short version is it's a very complicated model that we've been through with planning officers a number of times in a lot of detail to help them see the flow of how additional patients come into the hospital unfunded. There's a standard sort of cost for those of what it costs us to treat those, and the lag between the time when funding then catches up. At that point, that resource that we would be replacing equipment with fills that hole and the equipment goes on pause. So there's quite a complex chain, but it is down to actual numbers of houses linked to a same model that's been used in several areas of the country as a way of giving a objective way of what does an average house in an area cost, and it's adjusted for the local area. So we're not using Wiltshire prices or something for here. It's based on the cost for our patients. So there really is, let's say, we've got some of the richest data in the country in the NHS for kind of what you understand's happening in your area and how it's costed. So it's not we've plugged a number. It's directly related, adjusted for North East Derbyshire, and related to the number of houses. And there's a value per house of what we know the cost that comes in that will be completely unfunded and take from other patient care as a result of development until that funding flows in a year to 18 months later. Which I say is a chapter on its own, which we're very happy to come with from my team and talk through as a more general matter. But I can assure you it's not just a number plucked from the air. There's a very detailed model sits behind it.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. No more questions. Move on to the next speaker, which is Angela Cooper. You have 3 minutes now when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. The proposal indicates that the developer will adopt part of the lane. Well, who has the authority to give the go-ahead for because the council don't own the lane? If the council does give the go-ahead for the adoption, it should be for the whole of the lane and not just part of it. If only part is adopted, then the water off this part will again run down the lane, causing more erosion. I and other landowners have been asked numerous times by passing people, horse riders, who's going to fill in the holes? And on numerous occasions, people on the lane have filled the holes only to be accused by the owner of the land that we're fly tipping, and this is outrageous. There is now 2 underground springs coming off the proposed development site. These have come to the surface and are running all year round. What are they going to do with that? Are you going to reroute it, or is it just going to be left to come back down the pasture lane again? The FRA makes no mention of the ditches and that run along the proposed development land, which at the moment should be cleaned and maintained by the current owner. This is in their deeds. This ditch has been neglected, causing water to run over and into the lane, and half of it has been filled with horse manure. Photographs available. So if the development goes ahead, who is going to be responsible to keep the ditches and the hedges all overgrown again? Section 18.7 of the FRA says that excess water will be allowed to flow through the natural watercourse. Well, at the moment, that appears to be down our lane, eroding the surface, including our access and everyone else's on the lane. This is not acceptable, and a suitable solution needs to be found. Since the new estate adjacent to the proposed site has
30
been
seconds
built,
remain.
excess water that it has been allowed to flow through the natural courses has increased tenfold. If consent is given, are previous planning conditions going to be applied? And if so, a rethink on some of the excess water and floodings are a concern, as I feel that you have overlooked this on the previous development to the detriment to everyone on Pasture Lane.
That's
I
time,
live on
Chair.
Pasture Lane.
Thank you. Sorry, is anybody got any questions for the speaker on points raised? Councillor Fawcett.
Thank you for contributing that. You mentioned you live down Pasture Lane.
I do live
That's
down
where the
Pasture
chapel would be to
Yes.
there. So your main concern is about the maintenance of the ditches and the cutting of the hedges. Is that correct? Obviously, with the
And
flow of
the water is coming off of,
Okay.
off of that land because
And-
already we've got it going down and I've got videos and it's that deep.
So currently, the ditches on that land aren't maintained
No,
to a suitable standard. Okay. If the development was to go ahead, but that was actioned, and the flow of water was managed more, precisely,
yes,
would that alleviate your concern with this development?
yes, I think it would.
Okay, right. And the hedgerows again, some hedgerows are kept in schemes. They get a payment from the government to manage them in a certain way. Are they not cut at all currently, or is it
No,
quite
no, they haven't been
sporadic?
cut for 2, maybe 3 years.
Okay,
Some of the landowners do cut them and they do dig their ditches out, but others don't. And the water coming off of that field is a particular problem
right.
because their ditches are full of horse manure and haven't been dug out, so
Okay.
aren't able to go down the water course. It comes down the lane and
Right.
takes the lane with it.
Okie dokie. Right, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. We've got one last speaker on this, which is Daniela Phillips, the agent for Greenfall Architects. You've got 3 minutes whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Daniela Phillips. I'm from Greenford Architects. I'm here to say that Greenford Development, the applicant have carefully considered the way that this site could most effectively be developed in accordance with the adopted policies and the design philosophy set out in the council's guidance. In this respect, although the allocation was for up to 35 new homes, we do not believe that the site can easily accommodate this number. So our proposal is for a slightly more modest number of 30 homes. As the officers' report sets out, we have worked closely with them and the highways officers, especially to resolve the technical issues related to the access and ecology in particular. I can confirm that the applicant is content to accept the planning conditions that are proposed by the officers in the entirety. There will also need to be a need for a section 106 agreement to deal with the various contributions that are outlined in the report, and the applicant stands ready to finalize this in consultation with the council. The contributions towards education, health and recreation and open space have all been agreed. We suggested that the contribution towards the traffic regulation order for High Street should be defined as a requirement. And I can confirm that the applicant is content that the TRO contribution to be applied as the highway authority's discretion, irrespective of whether there is a problem that will arise or not. Although the detailed design and layout of the site has not been completed yet, the indicative layout that we submitted shows that the policy requirement for 20% affordable housing can be met. We are also very conscious of the council's aspiration in respect of sustainable energy usage on the site, and the applicant is already considering the most effective way to achieve not only these requirements, but also to take account of the forthcoming future home standards that will be applied in 2025. The access scheme has been a subject for a lot of discussions, technical appraisal and design work to ensure that the local plan allocation can be delivered. As far as we can determine, the local plan envisioned that access would be from Pasture Lane. And so resolving the technical details to achieve this has been a primary area of activity. As a result, a safe and practical design that deals with pedestrian access, the gradient, and provides management approach to deal with visibility
30
has been
seconds remain.
agreed with the highway authority. I would also like to point out that the comprehensive and detailed ecological conditions have been noted by the applicant, and there is agreement that these are both appropriate and necessary. And although the site is relatively benign and has been used as a paddock for many years, the potential for reptiles and other animals to be resident on the site needs to be properly managed, and therefore the applicant is entirely comfortable with these relatively onerous conditions.
That's time, Chair.
Thank you very much for your time.
Has anybody got any questions?
Yeah.
Right, councillor Liggett,
Thank you.
and then
The resident with the subsidence issues, I just wondered if you can tell us or not whether pile driving will be necessary on that site with the underground mine workings.
Without a site investigation, I cannot confirm that yet, but we have submitted a coal report and the coal authority have come back with no comments.
And also, have you got any idea how you're going to cope with the underground springs and the flooding on the lane?
It will be resolved as part of conditions that will be carried forward. At the detailed design stage, everything will be sorted.
Will the surface water be going into the main sewers then?
At the moment, it's been proposed that it's going to be a combined option, but it depends, that will have to be resolved. And it is manageable.
councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I've just read through the report and they are probably contributing £300,000 in section 106. With all the comings and goings and deliveries from concrete trucks and all the things that are going to go on and off site, are they doing anything with the lane after they've finished? Or is that going to be resurfaced as well?
I presume they're gonna, that part of the lane is gonna be adopted or subject for adoption.
Sorry, Ms. Phillips, could you speak directly into the microphone? Thanks.
Part of the lane is going to be adopted or offered for adoption, therefore it's gonna have to be maintained either by a maintenance company or if it is adopted by the highway authority.
Yeah, it's that little bit of assume that worries me. I want to know that that is going to be the case, that it's going to be resurfaced, made good, so on and so on.
We are prepared to do whatever it takes for the road to be in condition. And yes, we do understand that traffic from the construction is gonna cause problems. And we are ready to assume that we are gonna surface it after.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If you take your seat again, please.
Thank you.
Right, colleagues, you will now have the opportunity to put questions to the officers about the application. Again, I would like to keep this part of the proceedings focused on getting clarity about any points you are not sure of. Once we have done this, we can then have our discussion about the application based on all we have heard and read. I would be grateful if you could not move any motions at this stage. Let's wait until we have all had the chance to make our assessment. Thank you. Over to, has anybody got any questions? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Adrian, please, or Adrian and the team. I was speaking about section 106s, Adrian, and we know we've had quite a few problems getting section 106 money in. I just want to make sure that what we're asking for is going to be gotten, shall we say. I mean, we're looking at 54,500 towards the primary school, 224,000 towards secondary school places. We're looking at the hospital, 66,000, 4,000 towards some ecology issues. I want to know that we're going to get that money in. That's the portion of it that bothers me.
The applicant, as you just heard, has agreed to pay the full section 106 contributions that have been requested. It would follow normal process, therefore we'd agree the 106 itself, subject to permission being granted, and then we would secure that monies through the normal processes, expecting the developer to provide that in accordance with the covenants that they agree to.
Chair. Yeah, I know,
Councillor
that,
May.
Adrian. I know we would follow that, Adrian, and I agree that's the way we go down the route of. But, you know, we've had plenty of these section 106s reneged on in the past by companies going bust, etc. That's what worries me. Is there any way we can get that section 106 money before it even gets spade into ground? Is that ever possible?
That is possible if that's what you wish to require. However, that would need to be a reasonable ask, and to require, for example, the education monies before development started, in my view, wouldn't be reasonable, because that expectation wouldn't be delivered until at least some of the housing was actually occupied and lived in by new residents. So you could, but my advice is that that would be unreasonable, and you should follow your normal processes. In the vast majority of cases, the money is secured, and in the majority of those cases, it is actually provided for by the developer without us having to chase it. It's only the ones that become high profile where we are seeking to secure it through other means that do cause us difficulty, but they do remain a small element of the wider 106 ask. I don't see any reason in this instance why you should be concerned about getting the money and getting it at an appropriate time during the course of development if permission is granted.
Councillor Fawcett.
Adrian, this is a question for you. I note here that the drainage considerations raise no concerns amongst the flood risk statement, local flood authority, Yorkshire Water, and the council's drainage engineer. But obviously, we do have members of the public here that are quite concerned about drainage locally. Just trying to ascertain, because there is surrounding land here that will have ditches around it, but I don't have any evidence of where. They were concerned about maintenance of those. There is no effective flooding, but the current surface water drainage, which has been brought into consideration. Is there anything in particular that we could ascertain as to the future and current management of those ahead of the development?
The recommended condition 16, I believe, addresses that issue that Councillor Fawcett's raised in terms of a detailed design, associated management and maintenance plan of surface water drainage needs to be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. And members will perhaps also note that condition 19 requires, prior to the first occupation of the development, a verification report is required. We often hear of this, and my advice is always to members that the existing situation of water management on site is an existing situation. You would expect new housing to manage its own water management in an acceptable way, or else you would have all the houses being flooded. So my advice would be that this shouldn't be an issue going forwards, and subject to that condition in terms of management. I think that would provide sufficient safeguard that this site would be properly drained and subsequent drainage managed. You also, and I know Councillor Fawcett didn't raise this, Chair, but there's also the issue about how the new pasture lane would be managed. And members again will perhaps note that condition 27 seeks to address that issue in terms of drainage of that new portion of highway off the high street. So my advice to members, Chair, is that these matters, I believe, are properly addressed by the conditions, and that I can never give a 100% cast iron guarantee that everything will be all right. But I don't think as a planning authority we could do any more than rely on the requirements of the conditions as recommended by officers.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Mr. Kirkham. I'm looking through this, and somebody else might have seen this, but I can't see it. I can see all the amounts that have been requested by different organisations for the 106 money, but I can't see the total 106 money that's been calculated. So that's one question. Second question is, which is, I guess, more difficult for officers, and I know part of the answer already, but I'll ask it anyway. How are officers currently minded to apportion the 106 monies? Thank you, Chair.
I'll deal with the second question first, if I may, Chair, because I don't know the answer to the second question. I'd need a few minutes to go through the mental arithmetic, or the paper arithmetic, probably, if that's important, Chair. But in terms of the 106 asks, members will note that in this instance, all the requests from the various bodies are being met in full. So as officers, we've not proportioned it up, as we may have done in the past, where there's been a suggestion that developers can't meet the overall total. In this instance, they're saying they will meet all the total requests from all the bodies. So we're just, we've agreed with the developer, as you heard, that there's been no dispute about that. The developer is happy to pay all the 106 monies as requested. So we've just taken that on its face and will, subject to permission being granted, we will collect the monies that are requested and then divvy them up, if you like, as requested by the various requestor bodies. So we've not, as officers, we've not sought to divide them up outside of that advice.
Councillor Foster. If I can come back then, Chair. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that from the paperwork. So my question would have been to the developer. You know, out of all these, does the developer agree to be paying all of these? I don't know if anybody else thought that was clear, but it wasn't clear to me that these were all accepted by. I'm getting a nod from the gallery there. But it's have we had that in confirmation already in writing?
It's just at section 7.11, Chair, is where we've covered it in the officer report, and it says the above items have been agreed with the developer and can be covered with it in a suitably worded section 106 agreement. So we've just taken that on its face, Chair.
No more questions for officers? Right. Thank you, Adrian, for that. This leads us on to the final part of the process, our discussion about what we heard, what we think, and what we want to decide. But before going any further, I would just like to ask the clerk to remind us about motions.
Thank you, Chair. Please bear in mind, members, that a motion must be moved and seconded before a vote is taken. If an amendment to a motion is moved and seconded, then that amendment will be voted on first. If a motion is to be moved which goes against the officer recommendations, then the member who has moved the motion must give the reasons for doing so. The reasons for moving a motion against officer recommendations should comprise the relevant planning issues and be supported by evidence as necessary. If a motion to reject officer recommendations falls, or in other words, it is not passed, that doesn't mean that the recommendations are automatically approved. Rather, you will need to take a positive decision through a further motion in favour of the recommendations or a different course of action. This will need to be approved by the committee through another vote. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I would now like to open the floor for debate. Councillor Liggett.
Thank you. I'm just very concerned because I do know that area reasonably well. It's extremely flat and extremely wet, and I'm just worried about this surface water because there's a lot of it around there. And I'm just concerned that yet again putting surface water into a sewage system that's already overloaded, because I know we do. I know Severn Trent say there isn't a problem, but there is in that area, and it's that that's worrying me more than anything. Thank you.
Councillor Fawcett.
I understand your concerns on that one. I mean, water companies are under a lot of pressure. I mean, we just haven't had the infrastructure put in for years. The money isn't going into infrastructure, it's going to shareholders at the moment. However, from what I've heard and what I've seen in the plan, it looks that those concerns have been addressed. There's not, sadly, much we can do about, you know, affecting the infrastructure of the drainage. So I think that's been addressed as per the officer's recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Fawcett. No more. Right, thanks, colleagues. Having heard and read everything today and the officer recommendations before us, what is the view of the committee on the application? And I am now opening the floor to motions.
I'll move the officer's recommendations, Chair.
I think we're doing second that.
I'll second that, Chair.
So we've got no motions forward, so we're going for officer recommendations.
Chair, would you like me to carry out the roll call?
Yes, please.
Councillor Cheetham. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Elliott. Councillor Fawcett. Councillor Foster,
Four.
Councillor Hartshorn,
Four.
Councillor Lacey,
Four.
Councillor Liggett,
Four.
and Councillor Rouse. That's unanimous, Chair. The motion is passed.
Thank you. So if you can all leave the chamber now, we'll move on to the next application. Thank you. Right, as we're not taking items 5 and 6 on the agenda, I'm going to move straight to item 7 on the agenda. The application NED stroke 23 stroke 00365 stroke FL. Installation of a domestic vertical wind turbine at Overholme Farm, Main Road, Cutthorpe. Resubmission of a previous refused application. Amended plans. In line with our normal practices, I'm going to ask the planning officer to tell us about any late comments and give a brief presentation showing photos and plans of the site. I will allow the officers to complete their presentation. Consequently, members, unless you have a point of order that you feel cannot wait, could you please reserve these or any questions about the process until the end? Thank you. Over to you, Adrian.
Colin will take members through this one, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, no late representations have been received in relation to this application. As mentioned, the application seeks full planning permission for a 7 kilowatt wind turbine within the farm complex Overholme Farm, Cutthorpe. Next slide, please. The aerial photograph shows the highlighted site and its surroundings. The site is situated to the north of the defined settlement of Cutthorpe, within countryside designated as Northeast Derbyshire Greenbelt. Next slide, please. The site location plan details the extent of the application site edged in red, including its vehicular access from Main Road. Slide number 4 shows a more detailed plan illustrating the location for the proposed wind turbine to the northeastern elevation of an agricultural building within the farm complex. Next slide, please, Aid. This slide shows the submitted elevational drawings, which illustrate how the proposed wind turbine would relate to the aforementioned agricultural building. Similarly, the computer-generated image submitted in conjunction with the application shows proposed arrangement with the agricultural building. Again, another computer-generated impression provided by the applicant shows an impression of the proposed wind turbine, this one being in the wider context of the site. And the final slide is an officer photograph of the farm complex taken from an access track to the north of the farm complex. To summarise the officer recommendation, which is set out in the committee report, footnote 54 referred to in paragraph 158 of the NPPF states that except for applications for the repowering of existing wind turbines, proposed wind energy development involving one or more turbines should not be considered acceptable unless it is in an area identified as suitable for wind energy development in the development plan. In this case, the North East Derbyshire Local Plan 2014 to 2034 forms the development plan for the area. It's set out in the local plan that based on the North East Derbyshire Low Carbon and Renewable Energy Study undertaken in 2011, the plan does not identify any areas suitable for wind energy development. As such, proposals for wind energy development will be considered against the government's latest policy guidance. On that basis, officers are of the view that the application is contrary to the government's policy position on wind energy development and consequently cannot be supported.
Therefore, it is recommended the application be refused. And that concludes the officer presentation. Thank you.
Just before you go on, Chair, you will recall yesterday at site visits, Councillor Lacey raised two issues in respect of the wind turbine, its proximity to the nearest residential property, and also the noise that the turbine was to generate. And advise members, Chair, that the distance to the nearest residential facade, that's taken as Lindala, I hope I pronounced that correctly, but the distance is just in excess of 90 metres. And the noise of the turbine that's been submitted in the details is that it is to be 35 decibels. And just to try and give some clarity for that, Chair, 60 decibels is a normal conversation and 80 is a ringing telephone. So that's sat in some context. And just finally, just sorry to contradict Colin, Chair, but we did receive one late representation that was in the pack that was sent out yesterday.
Thank you for that. Right, colleagues, we have two speakers on the application. First, we withholding till later on in the debate. We have two speakers on the application. The first of whom is John Robinson, the applicant. They will have 3 minutes to get over their points. They will also be informed when 30 seconds remain. As members, you can ask them to clarify any matters that have been raised, but remember your questions should only relate to the points which they have already made. Mr. Robinson, you ready? Whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this application is a small step in meeting low carbon energy goals, which you will all no doubt agree. 1. The submitted Photoshop of the proposed installation, drawn with the turbine in proportion, shows it is very little more obtrusive than a TV aerial and less than that of a chimney stack. The first anomaly, I can install that wind turbine on or within the curtilage of my house without the need for planning permission. However, I was informed that it is necessary to have planning approval to erect the same small turbine no more than 50 metres away from our building under the same ownership and the same address. The application meets proposals set out in the Brapton neighbourhood plan, which are farm lies. This plan is with the examiner at present, and there have been no adverse comments on this item. County Council have positively commented on the high level of ambition in it, explicitly referring to different aspects of climate change. DCC therefore supports these aspects of the submission draft. The officer's advice refusing the application is based on minor 54, note 54 of the National Planning Policy Framework. I would agree with it when it is used for 3 megawatt offshore wind turbines, but it's hardly applicable to a small 7 kilowatt domestic one. I believe the committee's decision should be based on the more important paragraph of 1856 of the same NPPF, which states, local planning authorities should support community-led initiatives for renewable and low-carbon energy, including developments outside the areas in local plans or other strategic policies that are being brought forward through neighbourhood planning. 6. Significant number of residents of Cutthorpe, including near neighbours, have sent in letters of support for the proposal, many with particular reference to present low-carbon energy policies.
30 seconds remain.
There have been no objections. The committee's commission should therefore be such that overrides these unfortunate anomalies. It also assists in achieving low-carbon energy goals and goes towards meeting the Council's recently stated priority objective of tackling climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Has anybody got any questions for Mr. Robinson? No, thank you. We have another speaker on this, David Catton. You'd like to take a seat, please? Thank you. You've got 3 minutes whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Committee, as you've just said, Mr. Robinson is a man with a mission to live off grid in his lifetime, and he's no spring chicken, is he? With that in mind, I'm here today to offer the strongest possible support for his application to install a modest wind turbine to accompany his solar panel and ground source heat pump installations, both made some years ago. He no longer has a gas boiler and he drives a battery electric vehicle. For the past 5 years, I've been the chair of the steering group developing the Brampton Neighbourhood Plan, which is now undergoing formal examination. Mr. Robinson has been an enthusiastic member of our group. He's contributed greatly to the plan, particularly with regard to our ambitions to reduce carbon emissions. No surprise there then. The planning department has made its recommendations based on their reading of the regulations. The regulations as applied to this specific application are manifestly inappropriate. They're for large-scale wind turbine wind farms and have no relevance to this modest proposal. The government announced last December that it was consulting on onshore wind projects and subsequently proposed technical amendments to the NPPF. If the government is willing to look at the regulations, will the district council support getting the regulations changed? Bearing in mind that Council Leader Barker's statement made only 2 weeks ago says tackling climate change is a priority for us as a council. A letter from NEDDC to Lee Rowley might have some effect. Perhaps in the meantime, we'll use your ability to make local exceptions and approve this application. Finally, if permission is still refused, when you get into your petrol or diesel powered cars after today's meeting, I hope you'll feel a smidgen of guilt as you make another contribution to global warming through the emissions of the exhaust of your car. Mr. Robinson won't. Yes, I also drive a battery electric vehicle and have had solar panels installed for almost 12 years. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Catton. Has anybody got any questions? No, thank you. Colleagues, you will now have the opportunity to put questions to officers about the application. Again, I would like to keep this part of the proceedings focused on getting clarity about any points you are not sure of. So I would be grateful if you would not move any motions at this stage. Over to you. Adrian. Oh, sorry. Oh, questions for officers. Yes, sorry. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. A question for either Colin or Mr. Kirkham. Just some clarity on page 84. We've got paragraph 7.7 and we've got 7.11. I understand what the planning framework says. I've read 156 as quoted by the applicant, and I've also read note 54. I understand what's in the local plan as well, and to a lesser extent, the new neighbourhood plan, which is currently undergoing adoption. When we look at what weight we place on that neighbourhood plan, my understanding was 7.11. So to carry weight, the neighbourhood plan should conform to the policies of the NPPF. And if it doesn't, then we apply no weight to it. My understanding is, and as this stands, that neighbourhood plan does not, in my mind, I'm not putting a motion here, Chair, but in my mind, it doesn't conform to the NPPF. So we put no weight on it. That's my understanding. And we heard that earlier in the training as well. I think you mentioned it there. But we look at 7.7. So just some clarity on this. The plan is unadopted, but has been submitted for examination and therefore carries weight in the assessment of this application. The degree of weight to be given to the neighbourhood plan is a matter for the decision maker. So perhaps for myself and other members of the committee, we have just some clarity there. I thought this afforded no weight because it's not in conformity with the NPPF. So just between 7.7 and 7.1. Thank you.
Yeah, I would disagree with the statement. I think 7.7 to my mind sets out more a general position on the Brampton Parish neighbourhood plan in terms of it
the amount of weight that it would carry in a decision-making process. But I do agree that if it's not set out in policy and not in conformity with the NPPF, then the NPPF would take significant priority and therefore we'd attribute no weight to the points set out in the plan, the neighbourhood plan.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. As it's in my ward and a couple hundred metres from my property, I think it's only fair that I should at least ask these questions of the officers as well. Adrian, I'm at odds to understand where, you know, the entire country is actually aiming to go green and is trying to help everybody achieve a better carbon footprint. And this is just one step towards doing that. It's hardly a huge propeller like they've got on the side of the M18 and all the wind farms that are out to sea, offshore, if you like. And again, you know, I was going to refer to probably what some of the speakers referred to. It's no higher than the chimney on the property. It's so inobtrusive that I couldn't really sit there hand on heart and say I'm against it, although I am against development in the green belt for green belt's sake. But this is just a green initiative. It's not a huge building. And should the applicant wish, as he rightly states, he can put this at the side of his house with no planning permission required. He can do it under permitted development. Is that right, Colin?
Yeah, just to take your first question.
Thank you.
In terms of obviously as officers, we need to give substantial weight to the NPPF, and within that there's footnote 54, which in this instance doesn't really distinguish. The only reference it really makes to scale of developments is to say that wind energy development involving one or more turbines. It does not make any reference to the scale of that development. So in that regard, we have to take that as read, and that very clearly sets out the circumstances in which wind energy development is considered not to be acceptable, as is the case here, because it's not identified in the local plan. In terms of the permitted development rights, as you rightly say, there would be some permitted development rights afforded for householders, but we can't give significant weight to that, if any, because those permitted development rights don't extend to outside the domestic curtilage of that property. Therefore, we have to assess it based on the merits of that plan. Yeah.
Chair, if you don't mind. I fully accept what you're telling me, Colin, and it does say that it is in the hands of the decision maker, which is ourselves around this table. If somebody can throw a bit of light to me and explain to me why, you know, 40 metres is different, stood against the curtilage of the chimney, shall we say, or against a barn where I guess it's going to house batteries or whatever it's going to do to put it back into the grid. I don't know, because I don't know anything about the thing. I'd accept that, you know, if somebody could tell me about that as well, please.
I think the fundamental difference is that wouldn't fall within the control of planning officers, and we need to look at it based on the policy context, which in this instance, the overriding factor is the statement made in footnote 54, paragraph 158, which clearly says that wind energy development involving one or more turbines should not be considered acceptable unless it's in an area identified as suitable for wind energy development. So there are permitted development rights, but in this instance, they wouldn't represent a legitimate fallback position because the circumstances are entirely different based on its siting.
Thank you, Colin. Chair, if you may.
Councillor.
Can you tell me if there are any identified parts of land within North East Derbyshire District Council, either our ownership or private ownership, where it's possible we could do this, as opposed to this one? Because I've no doubt if this came to us and it was stood against the side of the building in the curtilage, well, we wouldn't be sat here, would we? It'd be just going through. So is there anywhere designated for it? Can you tell me that?
As I understand it presently, based on the local plan, there aren't any areas within our district that are identified as being acceptable for wind energy developments.
Yeah, the council sits there last week and states we want to be the forefront of green energy and so on and so forth. And a minute plan like this is halted, shall we say, in its steps for 50 metres and the erection of it against a barn. But I accept what you're telling me, so thanks very much for that. I know Adrian's going to tell me something now.
I'm just going to, if I could, Chair, just re-emphasise what Collins advised members in that the position in terms of our advice to members seems to us to be very, very clear in this instance, that there is nothing in your own development plan that would support the application in terms of how the MPPF would be interpreted. And there's nothing actually in the neighbourhood planners coming forward that identifies an area where wind power would be appropriate either. There is just an objective set out in the plan, and the plan could, if it had wanted, address that point should it have wished. So no part of the development plan shows it, and the Brampton neighbourhood plan has not even achieved examination status. So it hasn't even gone through the examination where it would be assessed against the MPPF guidance. So from a point of view of officers, Chair, I don't think we could be clearer to members that we don't think there's any support nationally or locally for this, and we don't actually see that there's any other mitigating factors, notwithstanding what Councillor Elliott's saying in terms about wider objectives. In terms of wind power, the position seems to us to be fundamentally clear, and our advice to members is that it is clear. And in our opinion, I stand to be corrected by Lisa if I'm wrong in this, we don't believe in this instance we have any room for manoeuvre in advising you.
Thank you. Thanks for explaining that, Adrian. I appreciate that. Yeah, we did at least try.
Councillor Forster.
Just want to come in with a few points of clarification, just to outline a few things Councillor Elliott has mentioned. Who designates the permitted areas for wind energy? Who is the authority that can actually create those areas?
That would be this council, and that process was gone through when the local plan was considered and as set out.
Did that administration at the time designate or attempt to designate?
No, there are no, on the back of the evidence that was produced as part of that.
So there's no attempt to make any areas within the last 4 years?
No, the evidence indicated otherwise, so there are none of those.
So that's the reason why we don't have it.
That's right.
Okay. The next one is, Colin, you mentioned as well, Mr. Robinson could put this same structure within a domestic premises. That wouldn't require any planning, is that correct? The same.
That would be subject to its compliance with the relevant permitted development regulations.
Okay, but as long as it was within that,
there is
possible for him to erect such a structure.
There is scope to install wind generated developments within a domestic curtilage. Yeah.
So the guidelines that we're following, the MPPF, which is essentially the guidelines that state there are no onshore wind development for onshore wind. When was that updated? When was it released?
The latest MPPF version, Chair, was published in 2021.
So to clarify, the MPPF, and who was that published by?
It's a government document.
So the current government said we cannot build wind turbines.
Except within areas so designated in a local plan, and then with any, I'll just read footnote 54 if I may. It says that except for applications for the repowering of existing wind turbines, a proposed wind energy development involving one or more turbines as here should not be considered acceptable unless it's in an area identified as suitable for wind energy development in the development plan, and following consultation it can be demonstrated that planning impacts identified by the affected local community have been fully addressed and the proposal has their backing. The second element of that isn't applicable in this case because there has been no objections effectively, but the first bullet of that is applicable in this case, and there are no areas identified in the council's development plan as suitable for wind energy development.
So to conclude, government has said no more than one or more wind turbines are not appropriate to be built. That's the guidelines we're going on.
That's the clear policy position nationally. Yes, that's right.
We have had no designated wind areas created within the previous 4 years.
In your local plan.
Yeah.
That's
So
right,
when
yeah.
that local plan, so the time that's been available, no designated wind areas. But in the future, we could designate.
You could in any review of your local plan. and or the neighbourhood plan could do that. Any neighbourhood plans could do that, because that would then form, as if it were made, that would form part of the development plan.
So I can see today the evidence here about what officers are recommending, but I imagine Mr. Robinson may want to know how those decisions are, we've come to those decisions and the potential for the future, essentially. But thank you.
Councillor Liggett.
Is there not a wind turbine on Coney Green Industrial Estate? A big one? Just pointed out.
There are wind turbines, as members know, around the district, but they were given permission before the moratorium in effect came into effect.
Sorry, what moratorium are you referring to?
The national moratorium on new onshore wind proposals, which is manifest in the NPPF.
Right, okay.
And it does predate 2021, but the latest version of the NPPF was published in 2021. And I think it may go back to 2015.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I think we can look forward to trying to designate some places where we can actually permit some development like we're talking about. Flip side to it all is, let's not lose sight that Mr. Robinson can put this up in his curtilage on his farm, but not exactly where he wants it. Is that right?
Not necessarily on his farm, Chair, and not necessarily at 6.5 metres. It would need to conform with the permitted development allowances within his domestic curtilage. So that's his domestic curtilage, not his ownership.
Do you know the height of them, Adrian? If off the top of your head, if it's like, let's say, bolted to the premises, for want of a better phrase.
Sadly, Chair, I don't know off the top of my head, but I can advise Councillor Elliott of that, Chair, if he wants to.
That'd be great. Thank you, Adrian.
It's set out in the order, the relevant order, but I'm afraid I don't know that off the top of my head. I don't know. Learned colleagues may. I'm getting lots of shakings of head.
Lots of head shaking over there.
I'll advise Councillor Elliott out of the meeting, if I may, Chair, when I'm clear about that.
Thank you, Adrian.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've listened to a few of the comments that have been made. Having been on this, like some of us on this committee a while, this is one of the clearest applications I've seen, and it's very clear the officer's advice that's been given. Very clear NPPF advice, very clear local development advice, couldn't be any clearer, and it's in black and white for us to read it, and it's policy we must follow on this. We might like the idea of putting a wind farm or considering wind farms, and I take perhaps Councillor Fawcett's point. Yeah, it might be a good idea in the future, but when you look at developing local plans, they take years to develop, with steering groups, with lots of consultations, and there's an awful lot in it. What I'm afraid of here is that we might be considering giving permission for something like this at this committee. This could set a very dangerous precedent. Now, I gather that setting a precedent might not be a material consideration. Absolutely. But as soon as any permission for anything like this is put forward, you will find these go all over the place. Once you've given it one, the next agent will come forward and say, we want one, because they've had one there. We've got to be very, very careful at this first planning committee in this new administration. So I'd urge some caution with this. One thing we haven't spoke about, that's only the first part. In recommendations,
is this part of the debate, or are we, because we've not opened the floor to debate yet? I thought this were questions for officers.
I thought
have you got specific questions?
I thought with the views we've had, they weren't all questions to officers, and we moved on to a debate, Chair. But I'm happy to carry on a debate.
Is everyone happy to carry on with the debate, or has anybody else got any questions for officers first? Okay, I will open the floor for debate.
Thank you, Chair. What we haven't discussed is the latter part, and that's the inappropriate development by definition in the green belt, and that's as clear as clear. This does have an impact on the green belt. It is inappropriate definition, inappropriate development, and there's no very special circumstances to outweigh the harm caused. So when you look at the recommendations on page 86, these are as clear. And I think Mr. Kirkham's tried to put that point forward. So I get the idea that people might want to support wind development, and I understand the new administration with green objectives, absolutely. But policy is very, very clear here in its advice. I'm concerned that we might be setting a precedent if people feel that they might be going against officers' recommendations. And if they do, we need very, very clear motions putting forward. I'm very supportive in this case of officers' recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Anybody else want to contribute to the debate? I'd just like to add, I think we're all very sympathetic, I think, to what they're trying to be achieved. But unfortunately, his hands are tied by legal process and the local plan. So I think we'll move the debate on and we'll go. And is there any motions from the floor? You can't, Councillor Rouse. So we've got a seconder.
Oh, second that, Chair.
So that's
Take roll call.
yes, indeed, Chair. So just to be clear, that's to move officer recommendations, which is to reject the application. Okay, Chair. Councillor Cheetham.
For.
Councillor Cooper. Councillor Elliott. Councillor Fawcett. Councillor Foster. Councillor Hartshorn.
For.
Councillor Lacey.
For.
Councillor Liggett.
For.
And Councillor Rouse. That's 8-4 and 1 against. The motion has passed, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. We want to move on to the next point of business. Thanks. Thanks for your attendance. I now call on the planning officers to explain the next report, item 9, appeals lodged and determined.
Chair, as is customary, we reported all the appeals that have been received. I don't know how long this goes back, but certainly over the last 6 weeks. Members will note there's been a number that have been received. And as always, I'd encourage all members to read and take in the comments that are made on appeal. But particularly for new members, you should all be receiving all appeal decisions electronically and further to the election. And Councillor Elliott's nodding, so certainly, and that was happening formally, hopefully new members will be added to that and receive them going forward. There's been some interesting appeals here that members may wish to note, and particularly ones within the green belt that Mr. Williams at the Fleur de Lis and Mr. Leverton at Wingworth, I'd particularly draw attention to and raise interesting points of clarification. So just recommend those to members. Chair, happy as always to take any comments. Just forgot to mention, Chair, the appeals, Mr. Piggott, relate to sites, traveller sites within the green belt as well, which members may find useful in terms of future considerations. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Has anyone, Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to pass my thanks on to officers. Great job in sorting those appeals out. So great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Members, do we agree to note the report? Yep. I have no urgent business, so I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your attendance.